There we go. All right. Well, people are trickling in, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of get started. So make sure that we have enough time at the end if anybody brought questions and everything. So welcome everyone to Natural Autonomous. Oh, sounds like. Okay. Welcome everyone to Natural Autonomous Parenting, cultivating fearless curiosity and confidence without coercion. So today I want to talk about how autonomous parenting is not necessarily the what other parents will think of us. But if we give into these fears, then we set the relationship aside and alienate our children. It may sometimes be embarrassing in the moment, but we should try to keep our focus on the long-term goals. Because if you build trust starting from the beginning and you prove that you're a reliable, honest adult, then your kid will be far more likely to be open with you throughout their lives. And parenting with your child will be easier in the long run, and your relationship will be stronger. Our children will willingly seek our guidance if we remain supportive of them throughout their most challenging times. Something I hear often from parents of teenagers are statements like, "They just won't talk to me," or "I don't know what's going on with them. And some of this is because their kids were young. They would approach their parents with issues, and their problems were ignored or dismissed, punished, maybe even made fun of. This is common because young kids' problems can seem insignificant to us, outrageous even, or maybe even make us feel like they're being selfish. But this is a natural stage of development, and we still need to show our empathy and support so they can trust us later in life. So this really comes down to trust. Trust in your child, trust in yourself, how you model healthy communication, and trust that you don't need to make a lesson out of every infraction. Nobody likes constant correction. This brings me around to what I want to discuss today, which is clarifying some confusion I often see about this parenting philosophy. And I'm going to highlight some common myths and refute some of the assumptions that might hold people back from this way of parenting. So the first myth is that autonomous parents are overprotective. Some people believe that autonomous parenting is helicopter parenting, or about shielding our children from negative experiences or emotions. But it's really about allowing kids to learn and grow from their challenges in a supportive environment. And I touched on this a bit in the last presentation about how parents often insert themselves or interfere with play. And it's critical we give our children the opportunity to resolve their own conflicts. And unstructured play is a logical place for this to happen. When our children's having trouble, they can look to us for guidance, and we can step in and loan them our assistance. They'll learn so much about themselves if we give them space while remaining available for support. I really suspect that some people may misinterpret my actions as a parent while in public, which leads them to believe that I'm trying to protect or defend my kid. For example, if a kid shows up at the park with an interesting toy or my kid wants to use equipment that another child is using, I will empathize. So I may say something like, "You really want that truck. They're using it right now." Or, "You want to swing too, and all the swings are being used." My intention is to acknowledge my kid's frustration or disappointment. And while I'm helping put words to my child's feelings, It can sometimes be perceived differently. So people may interpret my message as passive aggressive and think I'm trying to shame the other kid into giving my kid what they want. This can sometimes feel uncomfortable. When this happens, the first thing I like to remember is that you have no responsibility towards other people's feelings. You cannot control how they think. But often I will add something like, "The swing's not available right now. Would you like to go to the slides and come back later?" Or, "They look like they're still enjoying the swing. Should we go see what is available right now?" And this helps clear the air and show that I have no expectation of the other kid. The second myth is that autonomous parents ignore behavior. So people may think I'm ignoring my kids' behavior, but autonomous parenting is about seeing behavior as communication. So it is true that I may not address or shame the behavior. Instead, I pursue the underlying causes. Now, you always stop your child if they're hurting someone or doing something unsafe. But we do not need to punish them or make a lesson of it every time. Very often, our children already know what they did something wrong. They just cannot control themselves. And the challenging behavior you witness is because they need your support. One of the places that I see is filled with a ton of judgment from others who seem to think I'm ignoring my kids' behavior is flying on an airplane. It's completely unsurprising that babies and young kids may scream and cry during a flight. I know, I've been there many times. And I've been giving the darting glares of disgruntled passengers who seem to expect me to have better control over my kids. And I often don't do much at all aside from acknowledge that my kid is upset. And there are several reasons for this, but the main reason is that I cannot actually control what is coming out of my kid's mouth. Nobody controls what another person says. And the kid is definitely showing me that this airplane ride is too much for them. And there's not much I can do about that. Now, if we were in a restaurant, I'd carry my child out, but I can't leave the plane. And the more attention I put on my kid's actions, the more power I'm giving it. So not doing much and remaining present is probably the thing that will get everyone calm the fastest. The third myth is that this type of parenting is too time consuming. Lots of people may be deterred to parent this way because it can take a lot of investigation and compassion on our part, especially while our children are young. And sometimes it's faster, maybe even easier, to throw a kid into timeout and move on with our day. But we're investing in the long-term well-being of our children when we take the time to give them empathy and understanding. As I mentioned before, if we keep punishing them or shaming them while they're young, they'll shut us out when they get older, and they'll learn to protect themselves from our judgments and punishments. But people may be deterred by this way of parenting because it can take a lot of time. But not doing this is way harder, and it'll take more time and energy as your kid gets older. And it's amazing how many people just want obedient kids and try sticker charts or timeouts or other forms of manipulation, just to find that these methods seldom work in the long term. And the amount of time parents end up spending frustrated or unsatisfied or confused takes way more time. So put in the legwork now so you can spare yourself the grief later on. Many people think that autonomous parenting spoils children, that it's about giving in to all of our kids' demands, and this will create entitled, arrogant adults. To some degree, children are self-centered and selfish, and this is developmentally normal. They're supposed to be this way, and it will change as a kid matures. But this parenting is not about giving in to children's demands. It's about making thoughtful and informed decisions while meeting a child's needs. The goal is to foster independence, responsibility, and collaboration. So don't give in to future fears, and don't let other parents worry you into compromising your relationship with your kids. Many people mistake autonomous parenting as permissive parenting. We're actually not treating our children with respect if we're constantly giving in to our children's demands. It's more important than ever to set appropriate boundaries and limits while still respecting the child's needs and autonomy. Not only is it critical for our own sanity, but it's actually the loving thing to do. because we'll be respecting our own needs, and we get to model that for our kids. Parents' needs matter, so hold your boundaries. You can still give empathy and show your support to children without giving in. And we will be giving our children consistency, which will actually help them feel safer. These boundaries should start with babies. For example, do not let them grab you in uncomfortable ways repeatedly or let them play with things that really bother you. Some common items that parents often dislike letting their babies and toddlers play with, but will give into because the child gets so upset, are things like cell phones, car keys, jewelry, wallets. But rules are super important in autonomous parenting. One of the things I made a really hard boundary over after having several power struggles with my oldest was to never let my kids in the front seat of my car. I realized it really bothered me, and my oldest would want to play in there for long periods of time when I needed to go somewhere. I was constantly battling the big feelings when I would try to get him into the car seat. So I would give in for a bit, let him play in the front seat in hopes it would appease him. But I would inevitably always have to pull him off the steering wheel and place a crying, kicking toddler into his car seat. So I know it can be hard sometimes, but with my youngest two kids, I hold this as a firm boundary. So in the rare moments that I do leave my car open and walk away, and my 1.5-year-old manages to climb into the front seat, there's very little upset or confusion when I pull him away. Having been permissive on this with my first was actually harder for both of us. But one of the reasons I think many parents believe that I have no rules is because I am a firm believer of setting up a safe space for children, beginning at birth. In this space, the child is free to explore with very little direction or judgment from me. I think of playgrounds as an extension of safe spaces. They're a child's domain. So I enforce very few rules on the playground. And I get all sorts of glares from parents when they see my kids doing things like going up the slide. So just the other day, I actually took my kids out and they kept putting mulch piles at the end of the slide so they could crash through it. It was a really busy day at the park. So there was palpable tension from the other adults at their perceived breaking of the rules, which I let my kids continue to do. The next myth is that an autonomous parent will never discipline a child. Well, autonomous parenting does favor natural consequences, the natural part of natural autonomous parenting. This does not mean we never intervene. In fact, sometimes what we do may actually appear like a traditional parenting approach. Let me give you an example. So, in a traditional approach, if a kid was pushing another kid at the park, a traditional parent might yell, "Hey, if I see you push that kid again, you're going straight home." So the consequence is that the kid doesn't get to play any longer. And they feel shame, maybe anger, frustration, probably feel misunderstood. And ironically, very often what the kid's needing is more playtime, not less. Now, alternatively, the respectful approach is not to sit back and let it happen. It's to provide support, understanding, and a sense of safety. So first, I may give a reminder like, "Hey, bud, do not hit or touch anyone." And because I can see my kid is struggling, I try to stick close to them. And very often, just the adult presence is enough to keep it from happening again. And the other thing is, I do not rely on my words alone. When I stay close, I will block hits and physically stop my kid. Now, if my kid is still persisting in hitting, then I will remove them from the playground. The difference is in how I support my kids throughout the problem once I make the decision to remove them. When they're visibly upset, screaming and crying, I will give empathy, not shame. And that might sound something like, "I hear you want to stay at the park. You are having so much fun. I'm going to make sure everyone stays safe. We can try again later." So both these approaches resulted in having to leave the playground. But the traditional approach relies on leaving being a punishment and is often accompanied by an inducement of shame, such as, "That's it. Now we have to go home. You're not being nice." whereas an autonomous parent will stay supportive. Might sound something like, "You seem to be having a hard time staying safe. We need to go now. I hear you're really upset and still want to play." This eliminates the shame, but you're not just allowing the behavior to happen, and it's more developmentally appropriate and less likely to result in kids trying to hide their aggression or lie about it. Parents often try to protect their kids from feeling any negative emotions, and are constantly trying to fix anything that causes upset. And it's actually far more respectful to accept and support a child than trying to fix their upset. Shielding from negative emotions takes many different forms, but it begins at birth. Parents will say things like, "Shh, it's okay," or try to distract a baby or tickle them to make them laugh instead of cry. While it is deeply uncomfortable to hear infants cry, and their cries are designed to make us respond, once we have provided for them all their basic needs, so they have a clean diaper, comfortable temperature-wise, they've been fed, all that stuff, then it would be far more supportive to hold them with acceptance of their big feelings instead of trying to distract them or quiet them. So we can support them by saying things like, "You sound upset. I wonder if you're tired. I'll be right here with you." Or just silently hold them and let them cry. Another thing adults do is give in to our children's demands when they're upset because it's uncomfortable for us, or we try to fix something when they're frustrated, such as rebuild a tower for them because it keeps falling. And I spoke about this in some detail during the importance of play presentation and how we can show support for our upset child. We all get stuck in this from time to time, but it's just a good reminder that it is okay for our children to be upset. So myth 8, that children come first. Lots of people think this parenting philosophy is all about self-sacrifice or totally child-centered, but it's actually about finding a balance that respects the needs of the parents and children. Self-sacrifice is problematic because our needs matter too. They're actually just as important as our children's needs. And if we ignore ourselves, it will build resentment and create burnout. So we shouldn't compromise our own needs. It's not healthy. And you don't want your children thinking they should ever have to compromise their needs either. And while our children do need us to help them meet their needs, if we consistently prioritize them at the cost of ourselves, we are actually not showing our kids that their needs matter. What they see is that we're in continual self-sacrifice, and they will actually be more likely to ignore their own needs too, which will result in a less fulfilling life for them. So practicing good self-care is essential to being able to show up for your children in a supportive role. And while we are responsible for helping our children, this is a good time to remind parents that it is actually never our children's responsibility to help us meet our needs. Kids do not have to make our lives easier or give us quiet time. We need to plan for that and set aside our own time, whether it's waking up 15 minutes early to have a cup of coffee without any kids around or hiring a sitter so we can take a nap. So myth 9, I love this one. The myth is you have to be a perfect parent. Thinking you can be a perfect parent is the most punishing aspect of parenting. Some people even think that once you understand this philosophy, that parenting will suddenly be easy, that there'll be no major challenges in the home and you'll never make mistakes. This is so far from the truth. I do not want people to think that I have a perfectly harmonious home or that I never get flustered or yell at my kids. I do. Parenting is super hard, and children are super triggering. So we will yell, assume, wrongly accuse, and do other regrettable things. This doesn't make us bad parents, just like our children's mistakes don't make them bad humans either. But if we refuse to acknowledge our mistakes, this can have significant impacts on children. So give yourself some grace and compassion when you do something you're not proud of. Model for your kids self-forgiveness apologize to them when you make a mistake so they can see the humanity in you. This repair is very important for the relationship, and without mistakes, we don't get a chance to repair. There are more benefits to apologies than you may realize. And when we do make our inevitable mistakes, apologies play an important role in the future well-being of our children. In fact, if we ignore our mistakes, we teach children that figures of authority never have to apologize and that you can hurt the people you love without any repercussions. But there's tons of benefits when we do apologize. The first one is it models responsibility. You're showing your children how to own up to their mistakes and forgive themselves. It builds trust. It shows that even when you make mistakes, you are committed to repair and you value the relationship above all. So apologizing helps rebuild trust. It models empathy. When you apologize, you're acknowledging the impact of your actions, and this will foster deeper connections. It creates a safe environment. Kids will be less likely to hide their mistakes from us and more comfortable making mistakes too. And that may sound counterproductive, but an immense amount of growth happens when we make mistakes. Learning comes with a ton of trial and error, and childhood is a wonderful place to make a lot of mistakes and learn how to move past them rather than avoid or ignore them. Apologies encourage a growth mindset. Making mistakes is a natural part of life, and what's important is how we handle them. People often avoid trying new things just because they fear the mistakes they might make along the way, but this will hold you back from living a fulfilling life. And lastly, apologizing models conflict resolution. Apologies involve acknowledging the other person's perspective, and while it can feel vulnerable to do this, when we're able to acknowledge alternative perspectives, we deepen our connection to others and increase our social well-being. So there's many opinions and assumptions people make about parenting, and our choices may seem confusing to others, but it is so critical we do not let this deter us. Know that you're on the right path when you prioritize your relationship with your kid. Try to let go of other people's judgments because people will judge, and that's okay. Don't feel like you need to live up to the expectations of others, and try to be less judgmental on yourself. Your children will see that you live to strong values, and they'll become confident in their values as they grow older. So, in closing of my presentation, I would really love to hear if any of you have ever felt judgment from other parents or handled an incident differently than you wanted to because you felt pressure from other parents. And there we go. That concludes the presentation portion of tonight.
I have a story of responding to an incident differently because I felt judged by someone. So I was in Ohio with my kids, and my fiance was there, and we went to his boss's house for a holiday dinner. Like, they put on a whole holiday dinner and party for families that worked at his work. And my kids were not excited. There were some other kids there, but there weren't that many other kids there. And my oldest is a little on the spectrum, and he doesn't really have a filter, and he just was like, "Mom, I'm not having a fun time. I want to go now." And I was kind of like, "Okay, I hear you. We'll go soon, And he said it multiple times, and he started getting like kind of louder about it. And he said it right in front of the hosts, who are my fiance's bosses. And I was mortified because I didn't want them to feel offended because for obvious reasons. Luckily, they were very understanding about it. Both of their kids are autistic, and they were like, "Oh, don't worry about it." But I would probably have handled that better if I was like at your house, Barbara, because I know like we, know each other, and I'm not worried about offending you. But I did feel judged in that situation. I was like, like, stop, shh, that's rude, kind of like trying to whisper in his ear. Whereas normally I would be like, I hear you don't want to go, we'll leave soon, we have to do this. I was very embarrassed and definitely handled that differently.
I love it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've definitely had that experience many times. It's hard. It's so hard because you could just feel from other parents so much judgment and this expectation. They're like, "Aren't you going to do something about that?" And sometimes I can be pretty indignant. I'm just no, I'm definitely not going to do anything about that. Other times um I might say something to kind of alleviate the situation that I wouldn't necessarily say otherwise. Well, if anybody has any questions too, we can. You don't have to share your, parenting mishaps and such, but and it doesn't have to be about anything that I covered today. You are welcome to bring up anything at all. Wyatt raised his hand. Okay, you can unmute Wyatt. Do you want to write in the chat maybe? There should be. There you go. There you are.
Today, I took my 3 kids to an indoor play place, and it is such a fun place. It's been set up in a wonderful way where they've got art supplies, they've got an indoor jungle gym, they've got a foam pit, and all these things. And because it is spring break, there were a lot of kids at the indoor play place, a place where my kids are very, very, very comfortable and they spend a lot of time. What I noticed is that everything my kids were doing were causing the other kids. They were sort of instigating things with the other kids. So there is a foam pit where there are big foam blocks, and my kids jumped in and started throwing out all of the foam blocks. And every other time that we've been to this play place, my kids do that, and they like to empty it completely out. They hop in, I bury them. But I noticed that it was making all of the other parents uncomfortable, and the other parents even started throwing the blocks back into the foam pit, which was making my kids very upset. And in a moment of just not thinking clearly, I found myself blocking my kids throwing styrofoam blocks out of a foam pit in a play place that is entirely for them. There are no rules saying do not throw blocks out of the foam pit. It was just one of those very funny things where I had a momentary lapse of reason, where I am sitting there focusing on the other parents' discomfort with what my kids were doing. All of a sudden, I'm blocking them, and I had this moment of realization of A, I don't think I really care. B, I don't think I could really block my kids from throwing the foam out if I wanted to. And all of a sudden, I just had that realization and stopped and stepped way back and was just like, oh, wait, do whatever you guys want. I really don't care if you throw the blocks out of the foam pit. And I stepped back, and A, my kids had a great time. The other kids had a great time. All of the parents that were around also followed my cue and stepped back. It was just a really remarkable thing to see myself behaving in a way unconsciously or subconsciously experience, to see the second I stopped caring and stepped back and made it made it okay for everybody. It was really interesting, albeit also a little bit uncomfortable.
That's an excellent story. Thank you. I find really interesting because you noted this at the beginning where you said the other kids seem to kind of almost have a problem with it too, and that I see that all the time where kids are surprised and shocked because they've been told not to do those sorts of things so much that they don't even need the parents to tell them not to anymore. They'll seem super confused. Like, what? Aren't you going to, like, the kids will sometimes look at you like, aren't you going to do something about this? And very often, if you kind of shrug it off or step back and just play along, that alone can alleviate the situation. I love it. That's excellent. Yeah. Tricky situation. I understand how hard that could be.
It does get awkward. I've been in the situation before where, like, at the park, I let my kids go up the slide if they want to. If it's not a lot of people wanting to come down. If they're blocking the way from other kids using the slide, then I'll move them. But if, like, they're taking turns letting people go down and sometimes they go up, it's not a big deal. And I've been at the park with other parents who get mad at their kid for going up the slide because they'll see my kids do it, and then their kid will try, and the parents like, no, you can't go up. And it's so awkward because then it's like, okay, but I don't really want to hold that limit. So I don't know. It's there's a lot of weird situations you can get in with other parents not having the same philosophy as you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really great one too. Cause I let my kids go up the slide and I hear other parents, and sometimes, I can't know for sure their motives, but I will, hear them very loudly, don't go up the slide. Don't you? And I'll like keep repeating it, almost like expecting me to maybe enforce it too. But like you said, if it's not actually causing issues, I won't stop it. I'll stop it if a kid tries to come down the slide, and my kid's climbing up. I'll lift my kid up and say, oh, they're trying to come down, and wait till they get down. And then I'll let them go back up even once the kid comes down. Actually, it was just 2 days ago. I was at a park, and again, I can't know for sure, but my kids were definitely going up the slide a bunch. And one of the other parents, another kid, started going up a different slide, and it was a curly slide that kid went up. So kids started coming down because usually kids can see, like they'll see that another kid's coming up, and they don't try and go down because they don't want to hurt a kid. But this was a curly slide, so the kid at the top started going down, and then the mother went, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Get off the slide, off the slide. She was like apologizing to the other parent whose kid was trying to get down. And she said it so loud because it wasn't right where we were. I was like, I think she's trying to send a message to me because she's annoyed that her kid's picking up the behavior that my kids are doing. And I was kind of like, my kids aren't really causing a problem. And anyway, I didn't really do anything about it, but she kept insisting on it too. Like the apologies, like she even stopped for a second and then went back over to the other parent and very loudly, oh, I am just so sorry. I'm just so sorry my kid was climbing up the slide. I am just so sorry. I was like, oh, well, okay. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. And if it is a problem, kids are shocking in how they can navigate those situations. Usually kids know, like my kids will go running up a slide and a kid will try and come down. They'll see that my kid's halfway up. They'll step over. My kid will go up. The kid will come down. It really is surprising how much children are able to completely solve that problem. And there's not even a problem. The problem is the parents. The problem is the fact that the parents don't like it. And they're maybe worried about, kid crashing into another kid or whatever it is. Or I think it's more this mental thing. You don't go up slides. It's like, well, why not? What if slides, that's all we did was go up slides? Then we'd think it's super weird to go down slides. Anyway.
It is wild to me how many kids you can have in like a confined space moving around so quickly and no accidents happen. Like, I'm not saying that no accidents happen all the time, but I have seen parties, like indoor play spaces, lots of kids moving around. And I'm thinking to myself, like, are there not collisions all the time? Because their movements look so chaotic sometimes. And like, it feels like they're out of control. Like they don't have total coordination, but it amazes me how little that happens. It still does happen sometimes, but it doesn't happen as much as I would think it should.
Yeah. No, I agree. Even my not even 2-year-old, he's going to be 2 in the beginning of June. He's not even 2 yet. And he has a great sense of like risk assessment. So he'll be climbing around on things that other kids are on. And he just scoots right off the second he sees that he sees that another kid's coming and he's off and out of the way. And then the kid moves and then he's back on. Like it doesn't take long for kids to learn how to navigate those situations. And we worry so much as parents, but they're excellent. They're excellent at figuring it out.
Well, and there's learning in crashes too. Like most of the time where like, okay, they bump into one another on the slide and they might get hurt, and then they learn and they don't climb up curly slides. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
That is a great point. Sometimes I do a lot of that kind of risk assessment at parks and such. It's like, okay, if I don't intervene, what's the worst thing that can happen here? Okay, a kid might crash into another kid. Well, it's a shallow slide and it's low to the ground and it's not going to be like a hospital trip. So let's let it go. Let's let it happen.
That is hard though when you're dealing with other people and other people's kids, because you don't know how another parent is going to react if their child gets hurt. Because I know with mine, like if a kid bumps into one of my kids and they fall over and get straight knee or whatever, like we'll get over it. It's fine. I'm not worried about that at all. But some parents are a bit weird about that kind of thing.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. My kids are always barefoot, and they just don't like wearing shoes. And what I find really funny is my kids will be doing things at parks, like climbing up slides or climbing things. And they've learned that not wearing shoes actually makes it easier. You know, if you're trying to climb ropes and stuff, you could feel your footing really well. And so other kids will start to climb, and my kids will see kids struggle. And they'll say, you know, it's a lot easier if you take off your shoes, and encourage kids to take off their shoes, right? It's like, I don't say it. My kids just say it to them because they've learned that that's easier for them. And man, parents do not like it sometimes when their kids take off their shoes. It's really funny, you know? And I'm just, oh gosh, sorry, my kid was the one that recommended that. But it is a lot easier to climb it without shoes. But yeah, they're worried about whatever, splinters, toe injuries, who knows what.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. Like, freedom means that there's possibility of chaos. Like, there is going to be chaos if you control them.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, sometimes it looks really chaotic. The amount that you learn through that is incredible.
Yeah. I did have like something I wanted to say, which is one of your slides, you said like if you see your kid hitting someone else, like you would say, don't hit them. But then I also heard somewhere where they said, tell them to put your hands down instead of don't do this. What do you think?
That's a great point. So very often I actually really like to give like a positive action suggestion. So rather than telling a child what not to do, it is oftentimes way more informative to say what you do want them to do. Because, you know, it's like, oh, you know, stop hitting the wall. It's like, okay. They run over and start hitting the door. It's like, okay, well, I told you not to hit the wall. I guess you're not hitting the wall anymore. So yeah, something like that can be useful where you try and give them some sort of positive action or a redirection, something that they can hit. Like, instead of hitting that, how about you come over and do this? And that is tricky because if I were to instruct my kid to keep their hands down, I guess you could say keep your hands to yourself, might be something you could say. I like to be really direct when I see specifically an aggressive action, though. Like, I definitely don't want my kid to be hitting another kid. So, but what can be confusing is I might say, obviously I have 3 young children, so there's quite a bit of sibling rivalry. So I might say, don't hit your sibling, and they push, right? And then you start getting into the tricky thing where you're trying to backtrack. Okay, don't hit, don't push, don't kick, don't touch, right? And so then you're trying to do the like, keep your hands to yourself and don't make contact. But yeah, I mean, that is a good point. And generally, I do like to use sort of more positive action requests. Well, we can end the meeting a little bit early.